Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.
I'm so happy to be with all of you here today at the Bear Psychology Radio Show. And as you know, we've got yet another fantastic author as we're moving into this topic, bearing witness to evolving mind, mood, health. You all know I've found that the most profound changes occur when a person is truly heard and understood. And I like to think about it as deeply bearing witness to life evolving. We can feel incredibly stuck when we live with our fears and our stressors and our troubles all alone. But when we start to share, when we start to feel that we can open up in a real way, in a genuine way, where it feels that dialogue is supported and we have a powerful foundation for us to move forward in understanding and care, it moves us forward in our own trajectory of growth. Eileen Beltzner has a very interesting book that she's going to share with us today. Now, I have the actual book in front of me, which is Two Times as Much Love. But Eileen has also written another book in 2019. Now, Two Times as Much Love is a 2024 book. This one, which is How to Tame the Tumbles, the Mindful, Self-Compassionate Way, I also want to cover a little bit of that today. But first, I want to thank you so much, Eileen, for joining us, for writing this really interesting book, and for your work in this very interesting area, which is a separation and divorce story for parents and children, and really using self-compassion exercises to help the parents and the child. So thank you for joining us. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, it's a pleasure being here with you and with your listeners. And so I guess on the professional side, I've been in the field for over 45 years. And I started off as a child and youth counselor, and then eventually went back to school and got my social work degree, and then became a child and family therapist. And after that, one thing leads to the next. And then I was working in a hospital with staff. And then I met Anna. I took a course of hers on accelerated recovery program that she was offering, and I became a compassion fatigue specialist.
Do you remember what year that was?
Yes, 2011.
2011. Wow.
Yeah, 2011.
Yeah, I taught that course so many times, the accelerated recovery program for compassion fatigue. And I worked with so many professionals who had really experienced burnout, and they struggled themselves. A lot of people would come to the program and they'd tell me that they're there because they want to help other people, other professionals, or other people who were struggling with compassion fatigue, like burnout and stress. And, in many cases, kind of the stress of doing really, really intense work with others. They would tell me that they wanted to help others. But in fact, what I kept on hearing from people was, by the end of the program, they would say, but really, I now realize this was for me, that I was the one who needed to do that deeper reflection and exploration. I think there's always a need for that when you do work with people for any length of time. One has to always continuously come back to the place where we look at ourselves and understand that, we all have these vulnerabilities. So we can't just do for others, right? We cannot just do for others, just simply not to be done. So what happened? Where did you go from there?
Well, besides having a private practice and working in the hospital, you had an assessment by Kristen Neff in your package of information, and I ended up sending her an email that I'd really like to learn more about this mindful self-compassion concept that she's talking about, simply because I found the hospital staff that I would be seeing in my program to help them stay and not leave the profession, which many of them wanted to do, they're very, very hard on themselves. And I just felt that Dr. Kristen Neff she had a gem there, and that could help. And I guess, to put it, now that I know, and I've been doing this for about 11 years, maybe 12 years, no, 14 years, time goes by. I know that what they needed was a comforting inside friend. I call it that. Kristen would call it compassionate inside friend. I
Oh.
call it for my books, when I'm writing for parents or children, the word compassion it's very heavy.
So you say a comforting inside friend.
Inside friend to deal
Oh,
with
nice.
self-criticism. And I
Right.
in the story that we're talking about, Two Times as Much Love, that was something that the parents wanted to help their son Alexander develop.
Right. So this is the story. So the book covers this really kind of, it's a difficult story because, first of all, it's not very unusual. I mean, the divorce rates are pretty high, and so there's lots of children who've experienced this divorce of parents, and for some, it is exceptionally traumatic time. But in the book, you describe how uh, this trajectory can actually be navigated with parents who are also learning about what they need to do to care for
Mhm.
the child and also care for themselves while they're going through such a big change in life. So they learn these compassionate tools. And I noticed in the book you could either read it together with the children or read it on your own so that you learn about what it takes to really go through this with a child, or go through it with yourselves. And two times as much, although you're teaching about compassionate tools and about divorce and the impact on parents and children, it's actually a novel that's focused on a protagonist. Like, the protagonist is the main character, Alexander, the elementary school teacher student, and he starts with this like great joy of getting the dog Sir Percival, which, of course, is interesting in itself. That he gets this dog, and the dog takes on like a narrator, a meta narrator role of observing and commenting as he grows from puppy to mature devoted dog. But before we get into all of that, can you talk about the significance of Sir Percival, which is one of King Arthur's knights of the Round Table, and an extremely difficult and dangerous quest to find the Holy Grail. And this seems to set things in motion. So, what is it like? You chose that name, Sir Percival. So, what was going on for you when you made that choice?
Oh, well, first of all, when I was in university, I took a course on knights and English literature, and I was quite taken by the stories of the quests of the knights. And as time went by, we got a little dog, and that dog we named Sir Percival. And I was planning on getting another little dog, and I was going to call her Blanche Fleur. Now we're going back. That was Sir Percival's love. We're going back a long, long time ago. And so Sir Percival, my dog, it was a West Highland Terrier, really, really had a proud way about him. And he was such a loving little guy. And it was almost, you could talk to him at
Huh.
any time and get the comfort. So that's where the Sir Percival came from. And then it just developed um, as the character developed. I mean, originally the book was going to be called Alexander's Quest to Get His Friends Back, but it just morphed. It morphed, and it has a lot to do too with a teacher friend of mine. She knew that she'd helped me or read the book a lot of time, How to Tame the Tumbles. And she had said to me, you really need to write something for parents and children who are going through divorce.
Mhm.
And that was something that ended up happening in our family's life. One of
Yeah. So
my well, they're not children, adult children, ended up going through a divorce. And I worked an awful lot with families before going through divorce and working with the children. And um, I used to use therapeutic storytelling a lot, simply because what was important about that is you could get at things without, in a safe way through story, without ripping off a band-aid, what they're trying to heal. And when a child is listening to a story, a lot of times what they'll end up doing, they might say a few words. And it's not like you're sitting there going, so what do you think about that, John? It's just you take your time, and maybe they say something and they start to know that they're not alone, but they do it through story.
Yeah.
And to
Beautiful.
learn you're not alone. Yeah. And I just had such wonderful experience with kids and families doing that.
Mhm.
So I incorporate, I thought that was very important. So my friend, who was a school teacher, she ended up telling me, this was during COVID, by the way. And also what happened is my adult child and my little guy, who was
like a
at the time,
grandchild.
my grandchild, yeah, they were living with us during COVID. And I was doing homeschooling, I was doing this, I was teaching, I was doing all these different things. And so what ended up happening, I said to my friend Mary, I said, I've been trying to find a book that really speaks to some of these issues, because I really like to read it to my grandson. And I'm not going to mention any books, but there were books that were used all the time, and I just thought they didn't cut it. And so she said, well, why don't you write something? And I said, oh, you got to be kidding. And then she kept bugging me. So what I did initially was I just took the How to Tame the Tumbles and just had the mom and dad living in a different house. And that was confusing to begin with, doing that. And then I had her read the story. And she said, this is just the same story. You just got them living in a different house. And I just said, yeah, you have to write more than that. And she was on my case. And so it really was, she became a person who would read this stuff and said, you have to be more, you have to bring in the emotions and all the feelings. And I find, looking at this book that I wrote over a 3.5-year period, it really accentuates the voice of the child.
Yeah, it does. It does.
It's the child's voice. And
Yeah.
I heard the child's voice. Besides being a clinician, I heard it as a nana.
What did you hear it as? Sorry, what did you hear?
As I was a nana.
Yeah, you heard it. Yeah, because you heard this child and what the child was really going through without kind of needing to put a lot of layers on. This kid just felt safe with you, obviously.
Yeah, and so I would read. You see, he grew up. I had to grow up Alexander in the story. I had a wonderful colleague in the States. Her name's Dr. Karen Bluth, and she's been very involved in children and psychology, and she's written several books about MSC and teens, etc. And when I first sent her a draft, she said, you've got the age all over the place. So I had to work and work. I had to bring the kid up from about 3 or 4 to almost 12.
The interesting thing, just to pause for a moment, but the interesting thing is that it sounds like your book became excellent because you were willing to take feedback that probably at the time was difficult to take.
Sure.
And I always find that that's the path to growth. And most people hate it. It's like, it's one of the, so I'm just finishing a book right now with New Harbinger, and one of the most hilarious, I found it funny because, it's one of those moments where you go like, I can either get upset about it or I can listen to the feedback as bad as it is. So my my editor sends me an email and he says, I want to let you know that if this book, like the other pieces of the book, weren't as excellent as they are, I'd be very concerned about chapter number 1, which is terrible. And, I could either have like stopped in my tracks, but it's like it does take something inside to just allow it. You allow it. What's it like for me to get that feedback? What's that like? What do I really need to do with that? What's it going to take for me to hear it? If the goal is to make it as good as possible, what's it going to take to hear it? And I think in some ways, because I know you talk a lot about relationship repair in the book. That's one of the most interesting things I found about the book, by the way, because I'm familiar with a lot of the compassion, self-compassion concepts and strategies, but to include that and also add relationship repair, which I think is, one of the most important things that we can do in life. It's not always possible, but it is such an important piece. Now, I'm going to come back to it because Alexander writes a letter to his friend who he had hurt very early on in the book, which led to a lot of rejection, peer rejection. And Alexander took the very courageous step of writing a letter to his friend, this relationship repair piece. I just think by adding that, you create the opportunity for growth, like the possibility for growth for both the child and the parents, like just how this can all play out. I just thought that was such a really brilliant piece to add. So I'm thankful that you did it. And like I said, I'm going to come back to the actual comment, the book, the letter in the book, and how you wrote it and why it was so, so important. So I wonder if you'll just tell us a little bit more about, what it was like for you to go through the difficulty in your own family and to see, your own offspring go through this separation, and then to be writing this book, seeing the impact on your grandson for yourself.
Well, okay, I'll tell your listeners one of the outcomes of it all, I will get back to this question, was it was very therapeutic for me in the end. And I would write things and I would read them, and then I would actually cry because they touched my heart so much, because it really it came from my heart. And one of the aspects that I found, I don't know if this, I'm hoping I'm going to answer your question. You tell me if I'm not.
Okay.
But one of the aspects I found most interesting too was I would take what I'd written, parts of it, and go and read it to my grandson. And
oh, wow.
And that's where I usually don't use words like, well, there's so many interesting words in the book, fart and nasty fart and boogers and every other blooming thing, or bats in the cave. And he laughed because I said bats in the cave. That means a boogie in your nose.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Okay.
And he said, Nana, it's bat in the cave, And whenever he got quite bored, I knew I had to write more. It was bad. And or he'd say to me, that's not really funny. And I know that the book, I've been told by people, it's quite funny too. There's very touching moments in it and difficult moments. I think when, the part where the boy, Alexander, asks his dad if, because they're getting together every weekend to help him deal with his anger and become more familiar. Now, I'll be clear though, the anger hasn't got anything necessarily to do with the divorce. I make that clear in the beginning. I think you noticed where I talk about the boy's temperament right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Because anger doesn't always necessarily, I don't want people to think that, somehow my grandson was angry and was hurting people and doing whatever he's doing, being mean. But I had to wrap it into all the stories I knew and of real life. And I think the emotional parts came out sometimes when I would be putting him to bed or something like that. And it's tough. It's tough when a kid goes through a separation because they love their mom, they love their dad,
Yeah.
and they miss them.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I want to be clear, I'm not talking about a situation where there's an unsafe situation.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a divorce happens, a separation, because someone in the grouping is in danger of some sort. And that's not what I'm talking about. And I know also the parents in this story are, it's hard to imagine. It's a wish story. I don't know if you noticed that. It's also a wish story.
Mm.
Um, how it could be when two parents who love their child come together, even though they definitely will never get together again, as much as the little boy wishes they would. And he's always hoping. And the dog speaks about this a little bit. But the dad, in the end, the father, he clearly, when the boy says, I've been noticing you and mom are really getting along.
Yeah.
And the father says, yeah, your mom and I were concerned about that
Mm.
because maybe we thought you might be thinking we're going to get together again. And he said, well, I am thinking that. And the hard part was when the father said it, the truth. I think there's a chapter called Truth. I know there's a chapter called Truth is Often the Best Policy. The father just said, that's never going to happen again.
Mm.
Your mom and I will not. We've learned how to be more friendly, but your mom and I will never be getting back together again. And that's a reality. And it's hard when I wrote that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those things where, this uh, kind of compassionate, self-compassionate witness comes online, and you have to say, what's it going to take for me to just be with this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you wrote in the book, you have to feel your painful feelings to heal your painful feelings. Now, that's obviously, a simple way of saying, be present with this.
Yeah.
And you give examples of how the parents can teach the children and themselves to do that safely, like to feel the painful feelings in order to walk through them or heal them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, just I think the words I sometimes use when I was teaching mindful self-compassion to adults, I just say, we can only heal what we can feel, and what we resist persists. And just yeah, it's interesting. I've lost your question, Anna.
I'm going to tell
I
you again. No
because
problem.
I think I'm we're treading on it's issues of the heart. I'm
Yeah, well, so whenever there is a kind of a high cost conversation, when
mhm,
it's very real and it comes alive, it's going to uh, make our brain a little bit less available because we're flooded with emotion, right? So maybe
yeah,
the conversation is, a little flooding. So let's settle down, eh? And
I'll
see if
just
we can use our body and co-regulate and all of
yeah.
those things that you talk about so well in the book, the breathing, the naming, the sensing, and the use of those powerful tools as emotional regulation that Alexander gets taught how to use his body. Can you talk about how Alexander gets taught to use his body? Because that is woven so beautifully through the book.
Uh, yes. Um, I I'm sure you've discovered that many many of the adults you might work with, Anna, uh, they are cut off at the neck. They don't feel what's going on inside their body,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually an introspection uh, sense to be able to do that. But for all sorts of reasons, mostly if there's been trauma and there's as you know all of this, it doesn't go down. It's a way of protection. They just don't feel what's happening in there. And one of the things, and that happened with both the father and the mother. And they speak about, particularly the father, when he talks about wearing a suit of armor to his son, and his son is laughing because his father's drew him a picture and he's got on work boots the night, and the boy says to him, Dad, that's just not a knight, knights don't wear boots. And he said, well, I'm inside that armor. And then he talks to his son about the armor of his hurt in his life, and how he slowly started to take it off by learning how to notice his different feelings which were coming on inside his body. Because if you can't name it, you can't tame it. That's a famous line from Christopher Germer and Kristen Neff.
Isn't it beautiful that the father is learning how to recognize his own injuries as this is all evolving? That there's a realization, and probably it made the father and the son become much more close, because if the father is cut off, then there's no way they can have a deep and meaningful relationship. But it almost sounds like as this was unfolding, it became apparent to the parents that if they didn't come to terms with their own injuries, they were not going to be able to help their son, who they both clearly loved.
Exactly. And the father, the son says to him at one point, what would make you so scared, Dad? And I get frightened. I was afraid that no one would love me. And I mean, it's a heavy story, but it's not. And he goes, you were afraid, Dad? You? And he goes, yeah, I'm not anymore. I ended up learning ways to also love myself. And as I learned how to do that, and recognize the feelings that were going on inside of me, I was able to let down that suit of armor that I was in. And the boy can really identify with all of that. But the nice thing about the boy is he's a boy. And he doesn't really get it, but then he gets it because the father brings the language down. Actually, we shouldn't say down. The father puts the experiences that he has into the language of a young person. And
yeah, and that makes it actually really make sense, because you can share in a way that is easy for this young person to understand.
Sorry, I know another point I left out. Excuse me, Anna. And so he tells the boy he went and took something called mindful self-compassion training.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's where the boys, you needed help, Dad? Yeah, I did. And for people to say they needed help, that's so important. And for your child to know that when things got rough, you could seek help without feeling like you were a failure or not doing life right,
Sure. Yeah. You talked about the concept of co-regulation. I wonder if you would share that with our listeners today. And I just want to clarify for our listeners, because, we have this amazing community who joins us for this live radio show, and today is pre-recorded, so we're not going to get to hear from our listeners today. But I know you're out there, and we love talking to you. So I'm going to go back to this idea, the concept of co-regulation, what that really is, and why it becomes very important in our relationships.
Okay, so first off, when I was getting a bit touched in my heart, you ended up giving me your mirror neurons, comforting me. You did. Co-regulation is that it's very clear that instead of timeout, I was offering time in. And that's a concept that was brought to my mind many years ago by by a book actually called Time In, and the psychologist has passed away now, but he was, and I his name would be in the book, but I don't recall it right at this moment. But it basically is when Alexander would lose it, which he did a lot. The parents would be with him. They would wait and be there beside him until, and lend him their calm.
Mhm. It's a real being present and allowing.
Being present and allowing. And out of that, there became a good connection that they had what it took to settle him and be the parent that he
But
needed
I
them to
don't
be.
think that could have happened if they didn't do their own work. And
they did their own work.
They did. And the part that I find really interesting in this life is that we're all making our own choices. So sometimes I'll see families disintegrate and one person is doing a lot of work and other members of the family have no willingness to do that. So it becomes a singular showing up, a singular co-regulating, a singular self-compassion exercise, which is not always the easiest route. Here you have this ideal story of people who have made the decision to show up both for themselves and the people in their lives, which makes it highly precious, but it also models that this is something that could happen for each member of the family.
Yes. Thanks for putting that in such great words.
The trauma work. So what I can see is, this really leads into trauma work. We often talk about belonging as a way of dealing with feelings of shame. And, this story talks a lot about belonging and rejection and how to navigate that and where to find support when you don't have it, where you expect, because there's this big relationship breach with Alexander at his school and, teasing and bullying and all of that, and him having to get support from his parents,
Mm-hmm.
and, eventually getting repair at school, which is wonderful. But every one of us this is your line. This is your line from the book. Every one of us wants to belong, to be kept safe, to be loved. And that really captures this idea of the importance of belonging and how, we need to find a way to land in community in order for us to heal. When your family structure is crumbling the way Alexander's did, what did you see as the most important part of the cultivation of belonging?
Mm. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so you have written in the book that every one of us wants to belong and be kept safe, to be loved. But Alexander's world was crumbling. What were the elements that made belonging possible for Alexander?
Well, he had very attentive parents.
Mm-hmm.
They attended to his inner workings.
Mm-hmm.
They were hopeful that he could change. There was the father in particular was able to have a keen sense of what was happening in his son's heart at the time. I think there's a very moving part of the story for me was when the father, after the boy had been so upset about something, and his dad said, this was after he'd come back from school, and they'd really given him a hard time at school.
Yeah, he was badly bullied.
And the father ended up saying, well, what do you think you needed at that time that you didn't get?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I just want to belong. And knowing you have somebody who's got your back, and that you're able actually to say those words. And then what came into his mind too was all the places he did belong. I don't know if you remember that part. You know, he realized he does belong. He's got a mom and a dad and a grandparent and an aunt and the dog. And he could really start to work on that.
You know, I really think that there is something about this being aware of where we do belong. And for some children, for some adults, those places are narrow and they aren't as well developed as they were for Alexander. And yet there are these places that we could both develop and we can build through, you know, a skill of inner sturdiness. I think there is a need for that inner sturdiness. I don't think that people are taught enough about inner sturdiness and how to establish that. And I think this co-regulation piece is wonderful, but there's that piece around where do you really belong? And sometimes where you really belong is within yourself and paying attention and, you know, being able to find that, because it isn't always so straightforward that there's a place that we're going to land and our parents are going to be loving, you know, because of all the
Yes.
no, it isn't the case. And so, you know, sometimes we have to find this inner sturdiness and this self-compassion, even before we get acceptance and community. And that's what Alexander had to do. Alexander did not have a group of friends. They were bullying him and they were closing the door on him, not opening it up. And he did this incredibly courageous thing. And now I'm going to go back because I said I was going to, because I love this piece, Eileen. I just love it. Alexander had been very cruel to a classmate, and that had led to the students rejecting him and embarrassing him and humiliating him. And he eventually, after quite a period of time, decided that in his heart he could recognize he did the wrong thing and he could make the decision to apologize because he really meant it. Not before. Like, you don't apologize if you don't really mean it, because it's going to come across as flat and it's not going to really land properly, and people can tell the difference. You know, if you're doing it because, you know, well, I don't want to lose this friendship, you know, or I don't want to be bothered by people bullying me, that's not going to take it where you want it to go. But this is what Alexander says. He writes this out. He makes a decision to leave a handwritten note for Brooklyn, the other kid in the class that he really insulted. And he says, "Dear Brooklyn, I'm really sorry for saying gross words to you to get my way. It was disgusting what I said. I did behave like a nasty fart." This is kind of the teasing that he was getting after. This is just so funny. "I was a humongous donkey's butt too. Maybe you will be my friend again one day. Alexander. P.S. I'm not saying sorry to get you to be my friend again. I'm saying sorry because I am sorry. And one more thing, you are a much faster runner than I am." And as a result of being so honest, what happened with the relationship with Brooklyn and Alexander?
Well, it healed.
Yeah,
And
relationship repair.
Yeah, it was a relationship repair, and she sent him a text. And she also said, those people, I was the one who was treated so badly, and all those bullies, all those people who are treating you like that, if they keep it up, they're the nasty farts. And they really they need to apologize to you for the way they behaved. And so she became his friend, and he was really happy at that time to know he'd have someone to sit with at school at lunchtime, or to talk with a little bit. And this, I think you might have noticed, Brooklyn is quite a strong character in her sense. She took quite a stand to Alexander in the beginning of the book, and she didn't back down when he did this, because he
She
also, the
wasn't going to
key
let
thing,
herself get bullied.
no, and he
She,
threatened her.
yeah.
He threatened her, and he wanted her to cheat as well.
Mhm.
It was a game where he wanted to win and he was losing.
So I
And
can see this being a really incredible book for parents who are struggling after divorce, and when they have a child who's really suffering with anxiety or depression, or not really able to regulate all the pain and suffering and the losses.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it would be fine for parents, even when you don't have two parents on board. What do you think?
Yes. No, I agree with you. I agree with you. Um,
So
I
I
think,
also, so now we have had a moment to talk a little bit about the book.
uh-huh.
And we understand some of the emotional framework, but I also want to talk a little bit about the practical tools in the book, which are well explained, well outlined in the book itself. So it is really a useful toolkit. And I wonder if you would walk us through at least one or two of these approaches, because I think they are unique in themselves. Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, what's your favorite?
I really like the loving kindness practice, or
Oh, yeah.
as I call it, the friendliness practice. And
Yes.
it ends up, for me as well, when I was teaching, but before I was teaching MSc, that was something that really meant a lot to me, to know that I could give myself comfort and love, and wish, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe. And in this particular book, I put the Kisco effect, which is kind to self and kind to others, and we call it Kisco. You remember the story? The boy says, "Well, you can make a lot of money out of that, Mom." He put on a hat or something, and she said, I don't know if I want to make a lot of money, or would I, but I think it's a nice concept to offer up to the world. So you'd mentioned in the book, there's the book, and then there's quite a long toolkit at the back, and I wrote it so the scripts could actually be read by the parent to the child. The parent themselves could take the child through the scripts, um, uh, and the practices, we call them. And the child also might be able to take the parent, depending on the age, through it. And I don't know if you want me to do a short, I don't know if we have time actually to do a loving kindness practice. Uh, oh, you know what people can do? They can go to my website, and I actually have all the practices for adults on there. I haven't got the children's practices, but I have the loving kindness practices.
So are
I
you
have
talking about the selfcompassionsolutions.com, or the other website?
there's that one. There's a Podbean. I think they've got about 12,000 downloads on that. And I taught MSc with my husband. His name is Rayner. He also was part of the package. So he did a lot of listening and reading and helping me with the book too.
Oh,
So
you have a good network of people who are helping
I
you with all this.
I brought them all into it, and they were
Yeah,
like,
that
oh,
makes perfect sense for me. But I mean, I can see here the selfcompassionsolutions.com,
mhm,
um, both training and links to your books, and then a whole list of links. Um, right here on the website, selfcompassionsolutions.com. There's
Hmm.
mindful self-compassion training meditations that you can listen to or download.
Hmm.
And they're either Eileen, you, or Rainer's. So Rainer is your spouse then.
Yeah, yeah. So it's we wanted a
Perfect.
man as well,
Oh,
and
beautiful. And there's quite a lot of them. There's 22 um, different recordings. So that is a great resource and one that I think people could really enjoy. Waiting on yourself, mindfulness of sound, breathing, body sensations, touch.
hmm
You know, kind of these are things that sometimes we just need to disconnect from the busy, demanding life that we're all living. And sometimes it's not so easy to read it from a book, but it's really fantastic to have skilled guidance in all of this.
Yeah, yes. And I wanted to go back to the belonging point you brought up before. I wanted to tell you, I taught several hundred adults the mindful self-compassion training program. And one of the things, this one participant wrote me the most beautiful um, story about once she came into our classroom and how here was a group where she felt for the first time in her life she belonged. She and it was an amazing thing. And she was a very capable, confident, well-educated human being and had friends and family, but she just never ever felt like she belonged. And she blossomed after that. She absolutely blossomed. So the point you brought up about the belonging, the importance that you feel like you belong somewhere. And what Alexander did before was he learned how to find his own power and his own belonging. He learned how to comfort himself when he had pain
Yeah,
and
that and I
suffering.
think that is the balance because I mean we can lose a lot by only looking for our belonging externally
Yeah,
if we cannot find that stable core within where we are able to touch ground and find our sturdiness, then no matter how many loving people we have around us,
yeah,
we're not whole yet.
yeah.
So that becomes a really important piece of understanding. I know we only have a few minutes, but what I'd really like to do, if you don't mind, is just take a few more minutes to talk about how to tame the tumbles, um, because this is a full guidebook. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, this is another story again. I don't know if you know that.
I don't.
Yeah, it's a story. What it is actually the little girl in the story. Her name is Isabella Esmeralda Anastasia Pukapu, and she's about 6 or 7 years old. And there's a dog called Pookie in it.
Is there
And
always a dog in your stories, Eileen?
well, so far in
Yeah,
these
good.
two, these two, um, yeah. Uh, so the mother in How to Tame the Tumbles is actually the mother grows up to be the mother of Alexander.
Ah.
That and that's how she knows these things because her parents taught her these things.
Mhm.
And so she worked out the plan with Alexander's father on how they could teach Alexander this. But it's a much younger story, and it's just a story.
Mhm.
So and it talks about the time in and in fact, now that I have it in my hands, I want to give your listener I just wonderful time in for parents. I know we're I wanted to find the name of the psychologist who wrote the time in book.
Oh, that's okay. We can
Yeah.
look it up and pick it up back channel, so that's not a problem at all.
Okay.
But if
Okay.
if if you were going to cover any final ideas for our listeners, or bring in more of the self-compassion work, or anything that you feel would be kind of meaningful to end our show with today, um, what would you like our listeners to know?
I would want our listeners to know that I drank the Kool-Aid of MSC
Mindfulness,
because,
self-compassion.
yes,
Okay.
because I took all the training personally. I went as a student, and I know what it did for my heart. I we all When I begin the program, I always tell people a little bit about my background, and I am someone who had a lot of trauma in my childhood, and I just know how good this program.
Yeah, these practices are life transforming. Anything that gives you that sense of coming to a settled place within inside of yourself. Your book reminds me, and I think it would for our listeners today, that love doesn't disappear when family forms change.
Right.
It can actually, and I really do find this to be true in life, that life loves a vacuum. You just have to be open to what is coming toward you and
Absolutely.
recognize that saying yes can be exactly what you need. And healing doesn't come from denying pain, but from meeting it with some kind of tenderness,
Yes.
a sweetness, acceptance, a willing to say yes, even when it feels uncomfortable. Like, when we get feedback on our books. um, and
Yeah.
whether you're a parent or a therapist or somebody who's navigating loss, the lessons can be really the same. And this is what I really took away from the book. Slow down, breathe, name what you feel, offer yourself kindness. This is how we start to turn trauma into wisdom, and trauma can be the infrastructure of the wisdom that gets built as we grow and really start to become ourselves. So we are going to be signing off. You've been listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with myself, Anna Baranowski. My guest has been Eileen Beltzner, and she is the author of Two Times as Much Love, a separation and divorce story for parents and children, and integrated into it self-compassion toolkit. And it is worth the read, especially if you know somebody or you're working with somebody who has experienced this kind of loss. Thank you so much, Eileen, for joining us. I hope that we will hear from you again.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.